Howdy, folks. I'm Sam I Am. Welcome to the show. This is going to be a really important video that XRP holders need to watch and I think understand. It relates to CBDCs and Finestra. Now, that was in the news here just recently when Brad came out and confirmed that, yes, Finestra is a customer. They are a partner. We're working with them. And this is the FinTech Times article that came out related to that. It says Ripple and Finestra have teamed up to offer Ripple's blockchain technology through Finestra's payment solution to support fast cross-border payments. As part of the collaboration, Finestra's customers will be able to connect and transact with RippleNet partners, more than 200 financial institutions worldwide, and in turn, partners can access Finestra's vast global footprint. What does that sound like? If you said interoperability, users will also be able to send international payments with end-to-end tracking and visibility into fees, delivery time, and status. All the stuff the RippleNet pre-transaction messaging gives you. They will also have the option to use on-demand liquidity, which leverages the digital asset XRP for cross-border payments. Okay, now this was news. This is October 16th, so just a couple weeks ago. But this was not the first time that this came out. I'm going to show you Darren Moore's channel here. He's done a couple videos on it. I will link them down in the description. I'm going to play the intro from one of them here.
D+H Global Pay Plus hooks up to Ripple. D+H is Finestra. They changed their names. In 2015, Finestra partnered with Ripple by integrating into Global Pay Plus, its global payment service hub with Ripple's DLT.
Okay. Now, if you saw the article here, that's October 2015. Okay, so these guys have been in there working with Ripple since early days, and they didn't announce anything until like 2 weeks ago. Now, the other one, he's got one on CLS, which is the actual solution that we're going to be talking about as far as I can tell. And this is a commercial, and he kind of cuts together some of the important pieces to show you what it does. I recommend you go and watch both of these if you haven't seen them before. Okay, now, one of my Twitter followers sent me something that we're going to cover here because, wow, I was blown away once we actually got into it. It is a patent from who? D+H, which is Finestra. This is filed or published on August 17th, 2017, so a couple years ago. And however, if you look down here, the provisional patent was filed on February 2016. So that means they had been working on this all through 2015. Because a provisional patent, for those of you that don't know much about patents, you file one of those to basically bide yourself some time before you have to do your public disclosure so that you can continue developing the product and so forth and get further down the road before the general public finds out about it. So we're going to go through this. I've highlighted some sections, and I think a lot of pieces of what I've been talking about related to CBDCs and kind of the big picture coming together is really going to start to snap into place for you guys. So the abstract, what is this thing? It's performing peer-to-peer financial transactions using a private distributed ledger, allocating an initial currency value to a Genesis address, the initial currency value representing the maximum value of currency to be managed in the blockchain network. What does that sound like? If you said XRPL, give yourself 5 points. What they just described there, first off, I want to point out it's private. So it's not a public blockchain like XRPL or Bitcoin or Ethereum. This is a private distributed ledger. But what they're doing is creating this initial set of tokens, and that is the maximum that you can have. So with XRP, they created 100 billion. That's the maximum. And then they moved those into the blockchain, and that was that. That's exactly how this works. So you can bet that when these guys in the very early days were sitting down with David Schwartz and others, he was explaining to them, here's how consensus works. Here's how it's different than Bitcoin. Here's why it's superior. These are the shortfalls of a proof of work system, and this is why we've gone this way. And they have modeled their system, as you will see as we go further and further into this, after XRPL. Okay. Let's jump down. I think that was it for there. Yeah. So let's jump into the details. So they've got a whole bunch of paragraphs that I'm going to read you excerpts from where they kind of describe what this thing is, and they're referencing the diagrams up above. We're going to go kind of back and forth between some of those. Okay. So the background: various distributed currency schemes such as Bitcoin and XRP utilize public distributed ledgers to record and verify transactions between their users. Okay, nothing we don't know there. Summary: methods and systems for performing peer-to-peer financial transactions using a private distributed ledger are described. Allocating an initial currency value to a Genesis address. Another example method includes identifying a blockchain transaction, sending a particular amount from the first address associated with the first entity to a second address associated with the second entity. So all that means is it's a blockchain. They generated this Genesis address. It's got all of the tokens thrown into that address, but then they can create other accounts, other addresses, and they can send crypto or the tokens back and forth to each other, the currency back and forth. Okay. Identifying a non-accounting transaction in the blockchain network, including an output address, zero output amount, and recall indicator, and an identifier of an original transaction. So a lot of verbiage in there, but notice a recall indicator. Well, with XRP, with Bitcoin, with Ethereum, it's immutable, meaning you can't go back and change, undo transactions. With this one, though, guess what? You can. So it's not immutable. It's private, not public. What else in here? Output address, zero. There's a zero output amount. You can't send a transaction for zero. That has to do with the recall. We'll get into that. So let's keep going here. Where was I? And in response to identifying the blockchain transaction, generating a reverse transaction, crediting the input address of the original transaction for the output amount of the original transaction. So basically undoing a transaction has the capability. Figure 1 is a block diagram of a system in which a central bank creates a Genesis block in the blockchain network. So let's look at figure 1. That's right here. So you can see the central bank is adding the Genesis block to the blockchain, meaning this is not permissionless. You have to have the central bank's permission to join it. It's not decentralized. They are in control of it. It's all the things that Bitcoin and XRPL and Ethereum and most of the others are not. Okay, and you can see up here they've got this huge number right here. That is actually one shy of a sextillion dollars. That is $1,000,000 trillion. So you can see they're planning for the future. That should last them at least 5-10 years. But I've talked about in terms of a CBDC, and guess what, folks? That's what this system is. That is what they have created, is a CBDC blockchain for the central banks to use and manage. And they run it. The central banks are in charge of it, and they go around, see this asset up here, and it's CAD, that's Canadian dollars in their example. Why do you think they are listing Canadian dollars in the patent and not euros or US dollars? Who was one of the very, very first Ripple customers? You said Canada. Whoop. There we go. Give yourself another 5 points. But they've created this amount. So I've always said if they're going to do a cryptocurrency, a CBDC, they will have to have the power to inflate it. So that's not exactly what they've done. Instead, they're giving themselves this ridiculous amount of money, and they will only issue, as needed, but they always have the ability to grow it and grow it and grow it. And chances are it would be hyperinflation before you ever issue out a sextillion dollars. Okay. Okay. And then let's get back to the text here and keep going. Account database is maintained by the central bank in the blockchain network. So again, it's not permissionless. You can't just go out and connect up to this blockchain and issue your own address. You have to get one from the central bank. So that's what this is showing. The central bank has the account addresses, and you have up here in this table, you can see that you have the address that's like Bank 1, Bank 2 right there. And tied to those are account numbers. So this is the crypto side. This is the central bank side. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. The techniques described herein are not limited to blockchain technology and are also applicable to other types of distributed ledgers. That's important. That's going to come in to play here in just a minute. Let me read you the last little section here. Note they specifically mention Ethereum and Ripple. Why Ethereum? Well, especially in 2017, it's the only game in town for smart contracts, I think. What Ripple is doing with smart contracts will eventually sort of push Ethereum to the side. But anyway, they call those two out. The blockchain may be in a private blockchain published only to entities participating in the private distributed currency network. So again, this is a closed circle of trust kind of system that they're establishing here. In a private blockchain, the Genesis block may include the total value of all assets to be managed by the blockchain. So again, they do that first creation of tokens, of assets, and that's it. You can't just keep inflating it, so they just are going to create a huge number. For the purposes of the present disclosure, a blockchain network, that they have that in quotes, refers to a collection of financial entities, banks, utilizing a blockchain to record transactions among the entities themselves or between account holders of the entities. Okay. Let me see which diagram that is. I think that was, yeah. Well, so basically what they're saying is the banks can do it, but it can be between banks, but it can also be between account holders at the bank, if that makes sense. Okay. A solution that enables banks and other entities to move money among themselves and among their account holders over a secured blockchain network. So that's just, they can send value around. So really, CBDCs are a sort of domestic settlement system is what this is. And as we'll see as we get into it a little further, it's going to link the traditional system that we have today, that the central banks have, that they allow the commercial banks and central banks to interface with each other. It bridges that system to a blockchain-based one. Once a transaction is sent to the blockchain network, it is immediately settled and reflected in the bank's liquidity position on the blockchain scheme, with no need for an intermediary central bank authority to manage, and with full transparency between all the peers in the network. Okay, so this is sort of pushing the central banks out the door a little bit. So just like I talked about, with XRP, in my opinion, it makes sense to do away with the SDR and just use XRP in a few years' time. I don't think that they will do that. They will end up adding XRP to the basket of currencies. Why? Well, because if it's just XRP, there's no real need for them to have a SDR program or manage it. You have XRP. Same thing here. If these guys came in, and they could do this, and they are doing this to some degree, they could just come in and replace the functionality of the central bank with blockchain. Why do you need the central banks? Are the central banks going to let that happen? Fuck no, they're not. They're going to fight it. So instead, they're bridging. This is a baby step to where we need to get to. They are bridging the gap and kind of creating, just like Ripple is doing, a step between the systems of tomorrow, blockchain, and the systems that we have today. Okay. The solution provides a utility for members' banks to generate blockchain public addresses for their regulatory validated customers' accounts, manage internally the linkage between the customer's real accounts and their virtual addresses, and grant these addresses in the blockchain network for sending and receiving money. Just goes without saying. I'll just keep moving on. No. Okay, so what that means, and it took me all day to read through this and really comprehend what's happening here, what they're describing. If they have a trusted, like a big corporate customer like GE, and they want to give them some access to some of this functionality, what they can do is issue them an address or a public key, essentially a wallet, an account, and allow them to interface with this system. That's what that paragraph is saying. Okay. The solution also provides tools for creating the linkage between member virtual accounts, addresses, wallets, and their real account with the entity or bank, displaying the member's blockchain current balance and monitoring and controlling the balance. Okay, so you've got tools, a dashboard that lets you kind of see in real time your funds, your cash flow, liquidity, so forth. It's important for businesses. Okay, integrates existing payment technologies with the blockchain virtual ledger and secured peer-to-peer network technology to create a robust, efficient, and secured platform for peer-to-peer money movement and settlement in a private network. Okay, so again, that's everything we've been talking about with Ripple. You know, it's given them this blockchain that will let them do things on their own based on a rule set. It's efficient, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's in a private network. Banks and other entities may be able to provide their customers a better, safer, and cheaper payment service. Absolutely, they will. No doubt about it. Okay, System 100 issue, and this is diagram 1, issues a Genesis address for each currency that the scheme will support and sets it with the amount that will define the maximum accumulation of all the members' balances at any given time. So that is talking about figure 1 right here. And of course, this is just showing, here's the Genesis wallet. It's got a sextillion Canadian dollars in it, and the central bank is in charge of that wallet. And then as other banks join the network, you can see you've got Bank 1, Bank 2 right here in diagram 2, and we're going to read the text for this in just a minute. And if you look in the address, I can't really highlight it. Wait, maybe I can. Let me see. Yep, Bank 1. Bank 2 right there. Anyway, they've put some little codes in there. That's the crypto side, the blockchain side. And then over here, you can see they're tying that into the existing central bank account that we have today, or that the commercial banks have on Ledger with the central bank. Okay. So it's this system bridges those two worlds together and ties them together, takes away power from the central bank, puts it in the hands of the commercial banks, and even allows them to put some of that functionality into the hands of their corporate customers that have jumped through the regulatory hoops and so forth. Okay, back to the text. This is diagram 3. We'll go to that. System may include a blockchain position dashboard that reflects the actual position of the member's virtual account in the blockchain network and transactions held due to insufficient funds. Now, there's an interesting thing right there. From this dashboard, a bank can initiate a deposit and withdrawal request. So 2 interesting things right there. Number 1, okay, they're going to give them a dashboard that's real time because it's just going to query the blockchain and return the results. Here's your current account balances and so forth. But 2, with XRP, with Bitcoin, with Ethereum, with all the cryptos out there, it will check your wallet balance or your account balance. If you don't have the funds to send a payment, guess what? That payment fails. End of story. Not the case with this. What they've done is instead, they don't want to have to keep re-entering that payment all day long as funds move in and out to try and get it to push through. It goes into a queue that says, insufficient funds, and then they can try it again later in an automated way as part of the blockchain protocol versus part of the user requirements of wait till you have the funds in to try and push the transaction out. Other thing, if I publish my public key, anybody can deposit money into my account. Anybody can send me XRP or Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever. But I can't withdraw. I can't send a withdrawal request to anybody else. That's not part of the protocol. With this, it is. Why? Because that's how the central banks and commercial banks interact with each other. Okay. Includes an automated process to initiate a deposit to the bank's central bank account that will trigger funding of the virtual account in the blockchain network. So I take $1 million, I deposit it in the central bank account, traditional as it exists today, and boom, it triggers $1 million in digital blockchain currency that I then have access to use on the blockchain. Okay. May also include automated process to initiate a withdrawal of funds from the central bank account that will reduce the balance of the virtual account in the blockchain network. So also, I can withdraw from the central bank account and it will shrink my blockchain CBDC account as well. Okay, the bank reads the next confirmed block, identifies transactions that are intended for itself, Genesis address in the output, and input from registered members. The bank generates a transaction as per the bank's particular specifications to credit the member's account at the bank. So from what I can tell they're saying that this, I think we're getting into, figure 3. Let's just go look at that. So they're showing you bank 1, bank 2, and then this is the Genesis address. So they're just showing you deposits. But I think what they're getting into, and maybe it's figure 400, but you can tie this all in with customer accounts as well, and that's what they're showing you here with figure 4. Okay. Blockchain transactions that are rejected by the system are routed internally to the credit insufficient funds queue. Very different from the public blockchains that we have. And alerts are generated. An automated procedure is invoked at regular intervals that checks the balance and releases transactions whose value can be settled. So they got a retry process so that you don't have to keep manually submitting them or have a client-based retry. It's built into the protocol, which is probably good for them because they're moving money in and out. In some cases, the member institutions may transfer an amount to the blockchain address and then transfer the same amount back to its address. Some implementations may omit this step entirely or may initialize blockchain addresses for customers of member institutions using different mechanisms appropriate for the particular blockchain network. I think that is talking about like maybe repo. I'm not exactly sure, but they're talking about a couple things. One, being able to move money back and forth with the central bank, which is part of their nightly settlement, open and close procedures that they do night and morning every day. But they're also talking about being able to interface with some of the other blockchains, Bitcoin, Ethereum, XRP. Okay. An upload utility is also provided for members' banks to generate blockchain public addresses for their regulatory validated customers' accounts and to manage internally the linkage between the customer's real account and their virtual addresses and grant these databases in the blockchain network for sending and receiving money. The upload can be performed using full and/or incremental mode by using a web service. What does that sound like? If you said Xvita, give yourself 5 points because that's exactly what they're describing there. It's like they've been sitting in the room talking to David Schwartz, y'all, about everything that XRP does, and then they've adapted it for central banks. Yeah, that's what they did. Okay. In some cases, a group of entities participating in a blockchain network may form a second blockchain network with a new blockchain in order to manage additional assets. So The Canadians, they have their Canadian dollars. If they want to add another instance, they can do so, and they can interface with that one as well. Okay. Or it could be Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, not Litecoin, XRP. Sorry, Ben, Bitcoin Ben. Litecoin is nowhere to be found in this document. So much for it taking over the central banks and being the global settlement tool and everything else. Okay. The agent with which the address and the party's real account is held is not required to be identified in the transaction. So public transactions that the government can track and trace for all of us, private transactions for the bankers. Double standard much? Once this address is validated, the transaction is considered a candidate for settlement via the blockchain network. That's going to be convenient for them, because they can also, when things go wrong, well, I'm sorry, Senator, our system does not have the capability to show who authorized that transaction. Only we can see, we're going to get to the bottom of this. You can trust us. Yeah, as far as I can throw you, and my back's out. Okay. Using a rules engine in the system, the blockchain method of payment can be set to take precedent over other candidate methods of payment due to its lower cost and immediate settlement. What does that sound like? If you said pre-transaction messaging, give yourself 5 more points, because that's exactly it. RippleNet, that's what it does. It looks for cheapest route, the cheapest fees. How do I get this payment settled? And it presents that to the user for them to give it the go signal, and then the whole thing executes. In order to maintain full transparency of the payer-payee details and yet avoid managing each other's customers' individual balances, the system may define a 2-step blockchain transaction. Okay, this is key. So with Ripple, with XRP, with Bitcoin, Ethereum, most all the public blockchains out there, if you give someone your public address, they can see how much you have in that account. Okay. And then they can track where the money goes from there, and what you do with it and so forth. For the bankers, oh, no privacy for you. In fact, if you want to use a privacy token, it's because you're a drug dealing, money laundering, child sex ring running terrorist. And when we do it, it's just good business, right? So no privacy for you, but for us, we're the banks. So that's what they're saying. And they've done something interesting here. They've made it a 3-step process. And, part of that kind of makes sense. Chase wouldn't want Bank of America seeing its customers' balances. If GE is dealing with a supplier or something, that would give them leverage if they ever got hold of that information or the bank passed it along to them. So they've created this kind of 3-step process with the central bank acting as an intermediary, or I guess the protocol acting as an intermediary, to process the funds in 3 steps instead of between two parties or 2 points in the network, so that you don't have visibility of the account balances on either end. And Chase doesn't see Bank of America's accounts and vice versa. Okay, let's see. Where were we? Utilizes the bank's blockchain position balance and temporarily credits the initiating party's position. If the bank has an insufficient balance, the step 1 transaction is rejected by the blockchain system and the payment is routed to the insufficient funds queue. So that's basically their process flow. So that intermediary will check, are the funds there? Are we good to go? If not, then it goes into the queue to get retried later automatically by the blockchain at a predefined interval. If everything's good, then it passes it along. Okay. For each output address that exists in the bank's address list, the system extracts the real account number and performs the credit side accounting. These outputs are aggregated as inputs, and their total amount is mirrored in the output to the bank's address and sent back to the blockchain network, i.e. the bank's blockchain position is increased accordingly. All that's saying is basically everything gets tallied up. when a new, as the money moves through, it's correctly accounted for in all of the balances. It's probably the easiest way I can explain that. Okay. Now we're talking figure 8. Let's go look and see what that is. 7, 8. Okay. So here we're getting into the basically the undo button for the central bank CBDC blockchain. Okay. Showing a system for reversing a payment from the second customer to the first customer in the blockchain network. In order to overcome the general limitation of blockchain networks where transactions are irrevocable, again, we call it immutable, the system includes a process for sending a recall request for a transaction from the originating member. So nothing like that in any of the public blockchains that I know about anyway, certainly not for XRP, Bitcoin, or Ethereum. A special non-accounting transaction is sent to the blockchain network that indicates the transaction ID to be recalled. The output address of the transaction is the same as the original sent transaction, but with a zero value output amount, and includes the op return code followed by the original transaction ID. Okay, so what they're saying is, if they want to click the undo button on a transaction, they would find that transaction ID. They would send it along. That's it over here. I don't know if I dare try and mark this thing up. Okay, that's the transaction ID. There's the op return code, and the amount is 0. Of course, you wouldn't submit a payment for 0 because it would not be a payment. So that's why they're using that as the recall function, basically the undo button. The matched original transaction is routed to an approved recall queue, and once the user approves approval, a reverse transaction is generated and automatically sent back to the blockchain network. So both sides, basically, you have to submit it, and then the other side has to approve it. So it's not like an automatic thing. And actually, this would not be a bad deal, I think, for even the, XRP ledger or some of the other ones, to where when you make a mistake, you could at least send the request off to say, hey, sorry, I sent that to the wrong address. Would you be a good person and send it back? And maybe they will, maybe they won't. But anyway, so that's another very different bit of functionality that Finestra has included in their product, in their blockchain, in their CBDC, to be able to undo transactions, because these banks make big mistakes all the time. And it's probably easier to account for as well when you can just reverse the transaction versus sending another one back and then having to say, okay, this one is tied to this one earlier that was a mistake, and on and on. Okay, the blockchain network may be a Bitcoin network, a Ripple network, an Ethereum network, or other distributed ledger system. They're calling out those 3 for a reason, folks. The process, and this is diagram 10, includes in response to generating the transaction according to the specified specification of the second member, generating by the second member a blockchain transaction to transfer the particular amount from the second address to the address associated with the second number. I think that goes without saying. Okay, let me explain that. It's a little clearer in their flow diagram here. So they've got 2 blocks. The top one is saying identify from a blockchain transaction sending a particular amount from an address associated with the member. What does that mean? Okay, think in terms of XRP. I've got my public address. I send money into the Finestra system. That account is tied to Bank of Sam, and they receive that transaction, and in response to identifying the transaction from me, that, hey, they know, hey, guys, you know me, I'm Bank of Sam. They say, oh, okay, yep, we do. Come on in, sir. We'll take that transaction, and then they will generate a transaction according to a specification of the member to debit an account associated with the address of the particular amount, meaning they will take that and then act as a gateway and process it on their side, on the Finestra blockchain, on the CBDC side of the house. Okay. So that's bridge functionality, folks, right there. Okay. In some implementations, the blockchain network may be Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum, or other DLT. Process 11, that's diagram 11, includes identifying the reverse transaction by member of the blockchain network associated with the output address of the original transaction. In some implementations, and again, Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum. So 11, they're talking about doing the same thing. This might be private DLT, but why they said Ripple, blockchain, Bitcoin, or Ethereum, I don't know. There's no reverse functionality, how they're doing that, or exactly what they're talking about here. I'm not exactly clear on, so I wanted to include that. There's something they're trying to say there. I haven't been able to figure out what it is. Okay. Okay, let's see. So what is claimed? So these are the specific claims they're making related to the patent. Like, this is what we're doing. This is what's special and unique about our system. And this is why we want you to go gun down anybody who tries to do this without paying us. Because that's what patents are. A government implemented, a computer implemented method executed by one or more processors for registering new members in the blockchain network, allocating an initial currency value to a Genesis address, maximum value of the currency to be managed. So we set up a blockchain, we do an issuance, and that's the maximum that can ever be issued on that blockchain. That's why they made it a $6 trillion, a million trillion Canadian dollars. And then as they want to, we need to go invade Madagascar, then they can just inflate more money, print more money and issue it on the blockchain, and everything's good until they run out of the $6 trillion that they created, which absolutely will happen, and possibly even in my lifetime. I wouldn't be surprised. And then they'll just issue another one, and it'll be CAD 2. Of course, the currency will probably collapse before then, but we'll see. So that's the number one. They can identify a new member, generate an address for that member. Again, that's the central bank doing that, because this is permissioned. This is private permission system. So the central bank is the one. Finestra's managing and running the blockchain and kind of coding it and in charge of it, kind of like Ripple is in charge of RippleNet. But the central banks are in charge of like pushing the buttons and pulling the levers and that sort of thing. So they're issuing, okay, Bank of Sam, we don't like you, but you've jumped through all the hoops, so we're going to give you an account, basically. And then transferring the transferred amount equating to the amount to be managed by the new member. So what that's saying there is they will issue a credit with this CBDC, with this virtual fiat money. And I don't know if it's going to be based on Bank of Sam. We think, based on your size and your assets and so forth, we're going to give you $100 billion, or if it's based on the deposit that I make with the central bank at the central bank. Could be some combination of both. I'm just not sure, but it's going to be one of those two things or combination thereof. Allocating the initial currency value, including the currency type for the currency value. And it's, again, they keep talking about value in here. I think I missed it up above where it almost would have been more natural to say tokens, but they called it value because, again, it's CBDC. Identifying, generating, and transferring steps are performed by processors associated with a central bank. And then again, a new member is a financial institution separate from the central bank. The method of claim 1, wherein the blockchain network is a Bitcoin network, a Ripple network, or Ethereum network. So again, they can, in this portion, they're saying they can identify by generating, transferring, they can move money back and forth with the CBDC and Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum. And then down here, same thing, the computer readable medium of a claim 8, wherein the blockchain network is Bitcoin, Ripple, Ethereum. So that's more, I think they're saying they interface with those networks and interoperate with them. And that is it. So there you go. A lot of detail in there. It's kind of hard to like follow it all through, but folks, this is Finestra. This is what they're talking about with their CLS system. Let me see if I can find this right here. Let me go like right there, I think.
What's called mass enablement, so they will be able to light up, I think, all of their cores simultaneously. I might be a little bit off on that, but not by much. And I think that's happening later, the end of the second quarter. Because I think the timing on that might be off by a month or so.
But you're saying, what I'm hearing you say is probably
sure.
a 2019, not a 2020.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. What I think the simultaneous cores that he is talking about here, it goes back to figure 1. Let's go back up here. I would guess that this right here is a core. It is a blockchain instance or network that a central bank purchases the capability from Finestra to issue a digital fiat, a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, and then use it to interface with XRP. Now, think about this. What functionality do we have on the XRP ledger? Well, that's the ability to do issuances as well. So what if they actually do an issuance of Canadian dollars, which we've seen. I've shown you guys the Ripple Legend account where there's yuan, there's Canadian dollars, there's, all these different fiat currencies out there and some that we don't even know what they are. But they can interface the XRP ledger with this system, which manages CBDCs. I think they could partially end up issuing some of these CBDCs onto the XRP ledger, seamlessly trade that with XRP. Of course, there's other ways to go about that as well. But are you seeing the level of openness and interoperability and so forth that is built into what this system sets up? Where did they get the idea from? Well, from sitting down with Ripple, with David Schwartz and probably Brito and Chris Larson and others. They basically took the XRPL functionality and adopted it for central banks and made sure that the two interoperate. And they're planning to turn this up later this year. And what is, I've talked about this QFS that Richie Rich tells us is coming, is a real thing. It's been turned on. They're not using it yet, but it's turned on and moving real money around. And XRP is at the center of it. What do you think that is? If you said, oh, you can't see. If you said, shit, this way, this right here. Yeah. I think this is what the QFS, what they're telling us about. It is this system of CBDCs issued by central banks interfacing with XRPL to be a seamless bridge asset. And wow, is that going to drive a lot of volume and a lot of utility, and no way this doesn't affect the price eventually. So there you go. This was a Power Packer. I know a lot of details, but hopefully I explained it as best I could. I want to thank very much my patrons. You can go to patreon.com/tothelifeboats, learn more about that. Those guys make these videos possible. And go check out Darren Moore's videos. He has a patron as well where he publishes stuff kind of like this. So you can support him as well and check out his videos for more details. I'm Sam I Am. We'll catch you next video.